Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, September 3rd, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Florida and last evening's special elections, which Democrats yet again had a massive overperformance across this state and many others across this nation, as we have seen that special election after special election, it is the Democratic Party that is near consistently leading and taking ahead and swinging a lot of the voters from right to left ahead of the 2026 midterm elections, and Florida yet again is showing this as a prime example. Now, this is not the first time that we've covered special elections in Florida. If you remember back in April, there were elections held in Florida's 6th district as well as in Florida's, I believe the other district was the 1st district here. Two very solid Trump districts. Donald Trump had won these districts by over 30 points in the previous cycle. Democrats had been demolished across the district in state legislative races, congressional races, and of course on the presidential race. And yet in 2025, 6 months after Trump had been elected president, the Democrats saw a narrowing of the margin that was quite tremendous across these districts. Districts that had voted for Donald Trump by 33 points had reduced down to Republican victories of just 14 points and 15 points. Again, in districts that had previously voted so overwhelmingly to the GOP that in some cases and in previous elections, Democrats didn't even contest the races. They were that untouchable. And so to bring down, these two districts to the same margin roughly to that of what Florida was statewide, that Iowa was statewide, really puts into perspective that these very solid and locked-in Trump districts, in some cases like the 1st district, swung by 18 points to the left. The 6th district swung by 16 points to the left. And in the election that we saw last evening, which is now you can find averaged out on here, has seen a swing in Florida's House District 40 of 15 points to the left, and the much larger State Senate District 15, which swung 22 points to the left, overall contributing to that average movement in favor of Democrats in comparison to Kamala Harris's margin of an average of 13.1% for the year of 2025. Democrats have been doing quite well across a number of different districts, and these two Florida ones only add to it at large. And so thinking about why, this is something that the Florida Democratic Party has looked to and said, this makes a difference. Because it isn't something that means that Democrats are going to suddenly win states like Florida, but it indicates there is an appetite here, that the voters are looking for new leadership. The fact remains, these are Democratic districts. Democrats were supposed to win them anyways, but the margin at which you do win by is exceptionally important. That's why the Florida special elections in April were a big warning sign to the GOP. A lot of these special elections have also had very real impacts on the way that people, including Donald Trump as president of the United States, perceives the 2026 midterm elections. Remember all that speculation that Elise Stefanik was going to be UN ambassador? Well, obviously, it was far more than just speculation. She had been appointed by Donald Trump, yet to be Senate confirmed, to be UN ambassador. But the point is pretty simple here. Looking back at that time, the expectation was that Stefanik would be easily confirmed by the United States Senate, to which her special election would have taken place in her House district, a Trump plus 20 district. Republicans seemingly had no cause for concern there until a state Senate district in the state of Pennsylvania shifted 22 points to the left, if not more. I think the number is 22, but I do believe it actually was slightly higher than that. The point is that it was that shift and that special election that the next day, the White House and Donald Trump announced that he was going to be revoking Elise Stefanik's UN ambassador nomination because of the fact that that House seat was much more at risk than the eventual, UN ambassador's House seat that ended up being confirmed, which had been one of these districts that was actually about Trump plus, 30. And so thinking about just that, Stefanik's Trump plus 21 district was seen at risk because of elections like these. And even if it is a Democratic district, it doesn't change the fact that more people voted for the Democrats than in the last presidential election. Think about it this way. In 2024, in the state Senate District 15 in Florida, Kamala Harris won by 23.3%. It's a Democratic district, and that doesn't really surprise me. But the Democrat this time, it wasn't 23.3% that they won by. They won by 45.1% across the district. In Florida House District 40, a more, locked-in Democratic district here, voted for Kamala Harris by 35.2%. This time, voted for the Democrat by 50.1%. And again, I don't want it to get lost in this conversation that I still believe that Florida is in fact a red state. A lot of these districts here that, in a hypothetical reality that they had swung would have been indicating a bigger blue tsunami is a better term to put it than a blue wave in 2026. And that is not what we were working with in April, and it is not what we are working with today. And thinking about how this overperformance really does play into what we've seen on the national stage, I think it is pretty simple. Voters are unhappy with Donald Trump. Democrats are enraged and engaged and willing to vote in elections that in some cases, maybe Republicans aren't coming out in full force for. If you have the trifecta, oftentimes it is Republicans and Democrats who get complacent with their time in office. Democrats ushered in the largest Senate and House majority they have seen in the 21st century in 2008, and 2 years later, they lost House control, flipping 63 seats in favor of the Republican Party, and lost a number of seats in the United States Senate. Looking at Florida and what these results are telling us are that a lot of these voters on the Republican side likely are also complacent. They have control of the House. They have control of the Senate. And of course, they have the presidency and the United States Supreme Court to back them up. And so thinking about what is at stake for Democrats, arguably far more than for Republicans. And that's why you see that similar to these special elections, a lot of these other races across the country are shifting by similar margins, but not identical to what we're seeing on the national stage in terms of generic ballot. Because registered voter samples find that the race is a lot closer than likely voter samples. Why might that be? It used to be any AP government test or civics test that you might have taken pre-Dobbs decision would have routinely said that the likeliest group of voters are white voters, older voters, wealthier voters, more educated voters, which more often than not, in the historical context, are the Mitt Romney, Vineyard Vine style Republican rather than what you see today. And that is the very real reality that the coalitions have shifted, and those who are most likely to vote, especially in a Trump midterm, are not in fact Republicans. They're not conservative-leaning independents, but rather angered Democrats and left-leaning independents who feel fed up with what they are seeing on Capitol Hill and in the White House. And thinking about where we've seen this before, well, Donald Trump has been president before. In 2017, we saw a number of special elections that shifted by near identical margins to what we are seeing now in favor of the Democratic Party. The first special election to kick it off was in Kansas's 4th District. Ron Estes ran against James Thompson in a district that Mike Pompeo had won by a pretty substantive amount. In 2016, Mike Pompeo won by 31%. In 2017, the Republicans won, but by just 7 points. Then came Montana, a state that voted for Donald Trump by 19 points in 2016, 16 points in 2020, 19 points in 2024, had a race within 5 in 2017. Not because Montana was on track to becoming a blue state, but instead because the special election was one that Democrats paid attention to more than Republicans. And they turned out in a massive way. Rob Quist nearly became a U.S. representative from the state of Montana. Then came Georgia's 6th, the famed race where Tom Price, who went on to become HHS secretary, was elected in 2016, elected first time in 2004, reelected in 2016 with a massive, massive amount of vote there. You'll find that he won with 62% of the vote. But guess what? In the eventual runoff election, Jon Ossoff lost by just 3 points, then went on 3 years later to become a United States Senator. And South Carolina's 5th District held the same day as Georgia's 6th, actually a lot less media attention. The race narrowed up quite tremendously. Getting back to this point in 2016, the Republicans had won it by 21. By the next cycle, 5 months later, Republicans were winning it, but only by 5. And so these things happen, and they often show us that despite these districts being Trump plus 15, Trump plus 20 districts, it was the Democrats who came very close to victory in these special elections. In 2018, the eventual special elections that really indicated that Democrats were going to do quite well was the one that was at the beginning of the year in March of 2018. Connor Lamb defeated Rick Saccone in a Trump plus 20 district. A Trump plus 20 district. The Democrats won. And so when we see these special elections, I think it is important to note that while I don't think a 20-point shift is what we will see on the national stage in November of 2026, we will see a shift, and it will favor the Democratic Party. Republicans have seen this before. In the days leading up to the special elections in Florida, everybody started to realize that these races were going to be far more close than what should have been given the dynamics of the race. Trump plus 30 districts in no reality should ever even come down to being less than 15 points. That is a near and total collapse and failure on the Republican side. And yet, we saw it. Thinking about what we will see in 2026 is something that I think could be similar to 2018. Not in terms of actual margin. I think Republicans will have more seats than they did in 2018. But Democrats will come near close to where they are right now. 235 is not too far off from what I expect them to have by the end and early of 2027. But again, getting back to this point, what 2016 to 2018 showed was, again, some pretty universal, Democratic shifts in a lot of these districts. Barring a few exceptions in states like Pennsylvania and Louisiana and Minnesota, for the most part, 90%, of these districts, or yes, 80% of these districts did in fact swing to the left, and about 75 to 80% of them swung overwhelmingly in favor of the left, 15-point plus Democratic shifts from 2016. And so while it wasn't, this 30-point shift, it was certainly pretty substantive. And so to see it happen across a number of these districts where a lot of them were safe Republican by the end of it, districts like what we've seen in Nebraska where it's a Republican plus 50 district, but the Democrats come within, 30 points, that's still a 20-point shift. It might not make the race competitive because it's such a solid, Republican vote. And that's why the gerrymandering tools the Republicans have had at their disposal for far more often in recent memory than Democrats, you're going to find that it is that put them ahead. And that is the reason they were able to do quite well in many of these districts. But again, getting back to this point and looking at many of the races, there were some very, very notable shifts. And that's what we are seeing in Florida. And that's what we saw in Florida's 6th and in Florida's 1st earlier on this year. And that's what we saw last evening in Florida House District 40 and Florida State Senate District 15. And it standardly goes that across these districts here and across these races, Democrats on average have been outperforming by 13.1%. Prior to these special elections, about 12.9%. So this boosted slightly in favor of the Democratic Party. But nonetheless, it is important to note that these races, while may not be 100% indicative of what we see come November of 2026, it absolutely matters and is worth covering. And so we will see. Will these elections hold by the next cycle? Maybe, maybe not. But as it stands today, and as what we have seen from districts in Georgia to California to Alabama to Rhode Island to Iowa that we covered earlier on last week, to now Florida, and what might be Virginia, Minnesota, Arizona, across these states in the end of this cycle and the end of this year, we will see what the full 2025 average is. Because if it looks similar to how it did in 2017, that could be a major warning sign for the Republican Party, and arguably, it should be. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.